All right, boys and girls, welcome back to the Bad Decision Motorsports channel. Today we're going to be digging into this 6-liter LS engine. And, I've never done this before on this type of engine, so we're going to be learning it together. So if you see something that you're like, well, I would never do that, it's probably because I've never done it before. So go ahead and put a comment down below if you have suggestions as this build goes on. But I've done a little research, follow a guy named Richard Holdner on YouTube, and watched a number of his videos on improving a 6-liter. And I chose a sloppy stage 2 cam and valve springs as a solution for this engine. So we're going to start tearing this thing down. Okay, so just want to bring you in here and look at things before I start taking it apart. Obviously this is a 6-liter LQ9 out of a 2003 Escalade. All the accessories are taken off of it, including the water pump. So now we're down to the timing chain cover and heads. And I took the lifting device off. And I didn't know this or didn't realize it when I took the knock sensor cover off, is that there's no access to lifters like a traditional lifter valley. So the heads have to come off anyway. I was thinking that I was going to leave the heads on, but the heads are going to have to come off because I'm going to change the cam and give it a set of new lifters and maybe even push rods. So just depends on what kit that I purchase. So I'm gonna start breaking it down, take the heads off, take the timing chain cover off, and see where we go from here. Okay, we got one head off, and looks like we got a little moisture in this cylinder. Maybe when they were putting out the fire, not sure, but got a little rust. So we'll want to clean that up before we put it all back together. But got the head off, and that'll go one step further, changing the valve springs. And we've got the timing cover off. Gonna have to pull this timing chain, and cam is going to come out here. Now you can see these guides hold the push rods, and beneath this plastic cover is where you can pull out the lifters. So we'll get to that. Okay, so I've got a little farther on this engine, some of it off camera, a lot of it just clean up, but I wanted to talk about some of the stuff that I did after taking the heads off. Remove the oil pump, which required me to remove the pan and disconnect it. There's one bolt that connects it to the oil pickup tube. So if you're changing the oil pump, you're likely going to have to, or you will have to, drop the pan at least a little bit, get to the oil pickup tube bolt. So when I saw that, I said, all right, I'll just take the pan off, my gasket's set, is going to allow me to replace the pan gasket anyway. So I took the oil pickup tube off, removed the oil pump. That allowed me to get to the timing gear. So I took the 3 bolts out for the cam, removed the chain and the upper timing gear. Then I rented a 3-jaw puller, really simple 3-jaw puller from Advanced Auto Parts to pull the lower timing gear. That came off real easy. Just this is a tapered crank, and so now I'll end up putting the new timing gear back on, and it's got a keyway, and I'm just going to tap that back on. There might be a better way to do that with an installation tool where it presses it back on, but I'm just going to use the old gear and gently tap that back on. It was not a really serious press fit. It's just got a really easy taper, and it just after a couple turns of the puller, it came right off. So we're going to be working on the heads today and removing the valve springs and putting in heavier valve springs with this kit. So it's and I'll put all the comments down below, but I have a sloppy stage 2 cam with the recommended valve springs, and I'll put all the part numbers in the video. So I bought a valve spring compressor tool off of Amazon, like $28, and I'm going to start removing all the valve springs. Okay, so what we have now is the head that I cleaned up, and all I did was I soaked the heads in some Simple Green and used a Scotch-Brite to clean up the head surface. Now, I could send these out for like $40 and get them resurfaced, but again, this is a budget build, so we're gonna, put it back together with new gaskets, and we're just gonna clean up this surface. So they actually cleaned up fairly decent with just soaking them in Simple Green, and maybe there's something better that I could have soaked them in, but that's what I had laying around. So now I'm going to start pulling the valve springs out. And this is a really simple tool that I got on Amazon to compress the springs. So you bolt it to these existing bosses and drive this jam nut down and start tightening up. And what I would do is have a magnet handy to grab these keepers so they don't go flying. I'm just going to tap the valve. Now I can get these keepers out. Loosen this back up. Go. That's how you get off the valve springs. Now you can see those valves are freed up. All right, here's the new valve springs, and again, I'll put the part number in the description. And the sloppy stage 2 cam, and this is by Trick Flow. But these are the valve springs that we're going to put on the heads today. Okay, after I got all the valve springs off, I inspected the valves, the intake and the exhaust valves, and it looks like the seats, after 194,000 miles, the valves and the seats really, I should clean them up while I'm in here. And so what I'm going to do is take each valve out and take it to a wire wheel, and that is a brass wire wheel. You don't want to use a steel wire wheel. You don't want to remove any material, you're just removing the buildup on the valve. So first I'm going to wire wheel it, and then I'm going to use some valve grinding compound, typically called lapping compound, and we're going to lap the valve and the valve seat. And what you want to do is, once the valve is cleaned up, you want to oil the stem, and you're going to put it back in the seat. You're going to apply a little bit of valve grinding compound to 3 areas. And the particular one that I'm using is made by Permatex, and it has multiple grits built in. It's 220, 180, and it actually breaks down into a 220 fine grit as you're lapping. And what you're going to see is, as I'm doing this, I'm going to pick it up several times to redistribute it, because you'll hear everything smooth out, and that's the compound working its way out of the seat. And so by picking it up and setting it back down, you're going to put that compound back down in. Now, I didn't have a tool. You can get a lapping tool. It's got a little suction cup, little wood handle. I didn't have one here, so I just made one. I took a suction cup and a screwdriver bit and jammed it through it, and that's what we're going to use to do the lapping. So first we'll clean up the valve on the wire wheel. And now we're going to put a little bit of lapping compound on here, 3 different spots. And you don't want to get the lapping compound obviously on the stem, because you're going to scratch the guide. So I'm going to put a little lubrication, and I lost my straw. On the stem. Prop the head up a little bit. I'm going to push this suction cup on. And at first, kind of get it going. Pick it up. So I can kind of show you the difference. So now I've cleaned up that seat, cleaned up the valve and cleaned up the seat, but you can see the difference. So that's something, I didn't have to do, but all the compression is, and all the power is made in the head. So if we get this surface cleaned up, then you're gonna make better compression. And there is a spec for how wide this gets. But I'm going to pretend that I didn't know that, and because I'm not going to send this head out to get a valve job done on it anyway, I'm just going to run with it as it is. I just want to clean this up. We're just trying to do a budget build and on this basically junkyard motor. Okay, now that I've got 4 of the valves done, I wanted to try some alternative methods that I've seen, and so we're just going to try a couple different ways that we can do this. We can do it with a drill, but I think we always want to end up doing finishing up by hand. So let's just see how that works using a drill, and I'll show you a couple different ways. So I'm gonna oil the valve guide, and same thing, put lapping compound in 3 areas. And I don't think you have to be real shy with it. You just don't want to get it on the stem. So one method, especially if you didn't have a lapping tool, would be to use a power drill from the back side and just chuck up on this valve. So we're going to do that, and the way that I think you want to do it is you're going to do some forward and reverse. So you chuck up on the valve so that it'll spin, and then you want to give yourself enough room so you can pick the valve up out of the seat, but then you do this to distribute the compound a little bit. And forward, reverse, Now, the other way I thought of doing it, since I made this homemade lapping tool, which is really a 1/4 inch drill bit, or basically a socket head, is I can accomplish the same thing. Now I need to prop this up from underneath so that my valve can seat all the way down. But I could accomplish the same thing as the lapping tool by hand if I do this. And if you don't pick up and redistribute, you'll notice that it seems to smooth out, but you're not really smooth yet, because you've just pushed all the compound out of the seat. So, yeah, let me know if you've done this before and think this is the worst way in the world to do it, or if this is fine. But again, on this motor, I'm learning, and if these were more expensive heads, I might be a little bit more careful, but I think this is going to work just fine. Okay, now that we're done with the heads, we're going to go ahead and start looking at the rest of the engine block and see what I have already taken out, and then what we're going to start putting back today. So let me turn you around. Now, off camera, I did pull out the old camshaft, the oil pump, the oil filler, or the oil pickup tube. So I removed the oil pan, cleaned it up, the oil pickup tube. This is the new lower timing gear that's getting ready to go back on. What I'm going to do is use the old timing gear to tap this on. This is a tapered crankshaft bore, so I'm just going to use that old one to tap that back into place. And we're going to lube up the new camshaft, which is sitting right there. Put that back in. I've already used some of this ultra slick engine assembly lube from Permatex, and I lubed up all of the camshaft bearings. So going to put lube on that and go ahead and put the camshaft in, and then start assembling the timing gear and reassembling that. Then flip the engine over on the stand, put in the oil pickup tube, and finally the oil pan. So all right, I unwrapped this camshaft and I ended up looking at it and wasn't too impressed with the packaging and how it was stored. I ended up cleaning up what almost looked like discoloration or maybe even rust on the camshaft, even though it was completely lubed inside the packaging. I ended up cleaning it up using some brake clean to rinse everything down, wiped it down really careful, and now I'm going to put some assembly lube on it, and then we'll get it in the block. All right, so I put the camshaft retainer plate back on, and we're going to torque that to 18 foot-pounds. All right, before I tighten up the cam sprocket bolts, I just wanted to go over this because I took it back apart a couple times to make sure that I did it right. But first thing I did was barred over the crankshaft, so the number one cylinder was flush, and I eyeballed it at the retainer bolt, which is here, so that this mark on the lower timing gear was at 12 o'clock. And then when you go to put the upper timing gear on, you're going to turn the camshaft to match so that this dowel pin, when this goes together, this mark meets up with this mark. So you're going to turn the camshaft, get it lined up, put this on, and make sure that the upper gear is at 6 o'clock and the lower gear is at 12 o'clock, and then of course you're at top dead center. Okay, now we're going to torque the cam retainer, or the cam gear bolts, and that's going to get torqued to 26 foot-pounds. Okay, so now we've got the timing chain on, and we've got the engine flipped over, and we're going to put the oil pan baffle back on. So I clean this up, and we're just going to put it back on. And then we've got our oil pickup tube that fits down over these two bolts, and a new rubber seal on this where it goes into the oil pump. And the way this oil pump, you can see you've got like a floating gear in here that makes up the pump. And this is going to sit back over the crank, and this pickup tube is going to drop in here. So I'm going to put a little bit of oil on this and then set this gear to the right position to go onto the new timing gear. Get a little bit of oil on the seal. Okay, so I reinstalled the melting oil pump, so I put a brand new oil pump in after putting out the timing chain. Installed this oil pickup tube. Now I had conflicting reports on whether I should shim this oil pump. Some suggested that you just put the oil pump on and it kind of self-centers. I decided to use some 3/1000 shims to go all the way around until I couldn't put any more shims in. So I ended up putting 3 shims in at 12, 6, 3, and 9. And now I'm going to torque this down to 18 foot-pounds. Okay, I've got the front cover on, and I ended up cleaning up the oil pan for like the 66th time. There was just a lot of baked on oil and dirt in the pan, and I tried a lot of things around the shop, and I finally just kind of rummaged through the cabinet and found some aircraft paint remover, non-methylene chloride. So I thought, well, why not? This stuff strips the bare metal in 45 minutes, you know. So it does. Now it's aircraft brand, but it says right on it, don't use it on aircraft or bathtubs. So I don't know what those two have in common, but this stuff worked great and washed up with soap and water. So it cleaned up the oil pan really nice. I didn't really do too much to the outside, but just was worried about the inside. So if you find yourself trying to clean up the oil pan and you're having trouble with it, you can try some of this stuff, non-methylene chloride paint remover. All right, I just want to bring you in here and show you the bottom side of the block here where we're going to set the oil pan on. Everything's cleaned up. I just went over it with a razor blade to clean up the gasket surface, and I'm going to put a little bit of RTV in the corners, and it's not perfect, but I think it's going to seal up fine. This thing was leaking from everywhere when it was in the vehicle, so we just want to try and keep the oil in for this build. boys and girls, welcome back. Thanks for putting up with all that time lapse. I really, circumstances with noise in the shop, was unable to do a lot of talking during that. So now you can see I've got the heads back on and I'm working on torquing the heads down. So I went ahead and did one side off camera to kind of figure it out, and then I'm going to go through the process with you on the other head. So I looked up the procedure on Summit, and basically for the Gen 3 LQ9, you do a pass on all the bolts. First pass 22 foot-pounds, and I'll put this up on the video. Second pass, you turn the nut, and these happen to be head studs, so it's turn the nut 90 degrees, and then the final pass, another 90 degrees. So, you know, okay, so you can get a torque wrench and do the 22 foot-pounds, but how do you do the 90 degrees? And I guess the cheap and dirty way would be to go ahead and mark the fastener and turn it 90 degrees, but it's not very accurate. So I found a tool and then ordered it, and it took about a week to get in, but I want to show you that because it worked out really good. So this was just an Amazon tool, and basically how it works is you put this up against the head or any object and then dial this to 0, and then you're going to put your 1/2-inch breaker bar in here and begin turning it, and once you get to 90 degrees then stop for that fastener. So really nice little tool. I think it was like 20 bucks on Amazon. So that's going to help me do this procedure correctly. Okay, so now I've got my torque wrench set to 22 foot-pounds. This is a Quinn digital torque indicator, and that I picked up at Harbor Freight. So this is the #1 fastener on the chart. And you just bring it around until that tone gets solid. #2. Five. 6, 7. 8. 9. Okay, now we'll switch sockets for the smaller bolts along the top. Okay, now we're going to go back to fastener #1, and basically we got to find a place for that to rest, and then we set this indicator to 0. And now we're going to turn it to 90. Well, boys and girls, that's going to do it for this episode. Want to thank you for hanging with me during this engine build. I know some of it was kind of tedious and boring, but we had to learn it together along the way. So I hope you'll join me in the next episode as we finish assembling the engine and start putting it into the van. We've got lots of new parts to bolt onto it, and I'm excited about getting on to that portion of it. Please like and subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see our next video, and appreciate you watching. Thank you very much.